Lake House Horror Stories. Story 1. By Mark. I had always dreamed of living by a lake. When Justine and I found this old stilt house on Lake Castillon, we jumped at the opportunity. The price was surprisingly low, but the real estate agent explained that the previous owners had left in a hurry, abandoning the house for several years. The place was perfect, calm, surrounded by mountains, with no close neighbors. Ideal for a fresh start. The first few weeks passed without incident, except for this strange feeling of being watched. It wasn't constant, just fleeting moments when, looking out the window, I thought I saw something moving between the trees on the other side of the lake. But every time I stared at the spot, there was nothing. One morning, while inspecting the house's stilts, I noticed a locked hatch underneath the structure. I had never paid attention to it before. It looked old, almost invisible in the shadows of the dock. Curious, I scratched at the wood nearby and found a small, rusted keyring hidden between two stones. That night, while Justine slept, I returned under the house with a flashlight. My heart pounded faster than I wanted to admit. After a few tries, one of the keys snapped the padlock open. The hatch creaked as I lifted it. Inside, there was nothing but an old canvas bag, covered in dust and dampness. I unzipped it, and my breath caught. Inside, I found a wedding ring, several photographs of a smiling couple, and a small plastic pouch containing human teeth. I rushed back inside. Justine woke up, seeing me pale as a ghost. I showed her the bag's contents. She turned white and immediately wanted to call the police. But something told me that was a bad idea. That's when I looked up at the glass doors. Across the lake, at the edge of the trees, someone was watching us. He stood there, motionless, on the shore. I couldn't make out his face, but I could feel his eyes locked onto us. He didn't move. He was waiting. A shiver ran down my spine. He knew. He knew we had found his secret, and he wasn't going to let us go that easily. Justine's voice snapped me out of my trance. "Mark, what's wrong?" I turned to her, unsure of what to say. If I told her there was a man watching us, she'd panic. But I couldn't lie either. Slowly, I reached for the light switch and turned off the lamps in the living room. "Don't freak out, but someone is standing across the lake," I whispered. Her expression shifted from confusion to pure fear. She crept toward the window, peeking through the curtains. "Where?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. I pointed to the spot. But now, he was gone. A cold sweat spread down my back. He had been standing there, I was sure of it. But in the darkness, there was nothing but the trees and the faint shimmer of the lake. "We need to call the police," Justine said, grabbing her phone. I didn't argue this time, but as she tried dialing, she let out a frustrated sigh. No signal. The house was far from any major town, and our internet was down. "We'll take the car and drive to the village," I said, trying to sound calm. I grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife, just in case. We slipped on our jackets and headed for the door. But when I turned the knob, I froze. The door was unlocked. I was certain I had locked it earlier. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Justine must have seen my face because she immediately backed away. "You locked it, right?" she whispered. "Yes," I said, barely able to breathe. That's when we heard it. A slow, deliberate creak from inside the house. Someone else was here. I spun around, knife in hand, scanning the dark hallway leading to the bedrooms. Every shadow felt alive. Then, another creak. This time, it came from the floorboards upstairs. Justine clutched my arm, trembling. "We need to go. Now." I didn't argue. We bolted for the door, rushing outside into the cold night air. The gravel crunched under our feet as we ran to the car. I yanked the driver's door open and fumbled for the keys. That's when Justine gasped. I followed her gaze to the house. The upstairs bedroom window was open, and a figure was standing there, watching us. I turned the key in the ignition, my hands shaking. The engine sputtered, but didn't start. Come on," I muttered, turning the key again. Then, from the darkness of the trees beside the driveway, a sound cut through the silence. Heavy, running footsteps. Coming straight for us. The footsteps were fast, too fast. I slammed my hand against the dashboard, cursing as the engine refused to start. Justine was sobbing now, gripping my arm in pure terror. "Mark, he's coming," she screamed. I twisted the key one last time, and the car roared to life. Without hesitation, I slammed my foot on the gas, gravel spraying behind us as we lurched forward. The headlights cut through the darkness, just in time for us to see him. A tall, broad-shouldered man sprinted toward us from the tree line, his face hidden beneath the hood of a dark jacket. His stride was unnaturally fast, his arms pumping like a machine. Just as he reached the driveway, I swerved the car hard to the left, barely missing him. He lunged at us, his hand slamming against the back window. The glass cracked, but didn't break. Justine let out a strangled scream. We sped down the narrow dirt road, leaving the house behind. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel, but I didn't dare slow down. What the hell was that? Who was that? Justine sobbed. I didn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why was he in our house? How long had he been there? And, more importantly, was he alone? The nearest village was 20 minutes away, but it felt like an eternity. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure chasing us through the trees. We finally reached the main road and pulled into a small gas station on the outskirts of town. I barely put the car in park before Justine jumped out, grabbing her phone to call the police. This time, she got a signal. Yes, we need help. There was a man in our house. He was inside. He tried to break into our car. Please, send someone. I sat in the driver's seat, trying to steady my breathing. My knuckles were white from gripping the wheel. I glanced at the car's back window. A handprint was smeared across the cracked glass. A few minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. We explained everything, how we found the bag under the house, how I saw the man across the lake, how the door was unlocked from the inside, and how he was already in the house before we tried to leave. The officers exchanged glances before one of them nodded. We'll check it out. Stay here. They drove off toward our house, leaving us in the parking lot of the gas station. Justine sat on the curb, shaking, refusing to go back. I didn't blame her. After what felt like hours, the officers returned. One of them motioned for us to step forward. We searched the property, he said, frowning. House was empty when we arrived. No signs of forced entry. But he hesitated. We found something you might want to see. He led us to his car and pulled out a small notebook, worn and weathered. We found this under your bed. I swallowed hard and took it. The cover was damp, the pages crinkled. I flipped it open. The first few pages were filled with names I didn't recognize. Next to each name was a date and the word removed. I kept flipping, my heart pounding faster. Then, on the last page, my breath caught in my throat. It was my name, Mark L., June 14th, 2024. Pending. I dropped the notebook as if it had burned me. The officer sighed. I don't know what you two got yourselves into, but my advice? Don't go back there. Justine didn't need convincing. We never returned to the lake house. We left everything behind, selling the property at a loss just to get rid of it. I don't know who that man was or why my name was in that book, but one thing still keeps me up at night, that last word. Pending. Was it a warning? A threat? Or was it just unfinished business? Story 2, by James. When my girlfriend and I found the listing for an old lakeside house at a ridiculously low price, we thought we had hit the jackpot. It needed some work, sure, but the location was perfect, secluded, peaceful, right by the water. We planned to renovate it and turn it into a vacation rental. From the moment we arrived, though, something felt off. The house had been vacant for years, yet inside, it didn't feel abandoned. There was no dust on the countertops. The air didn't have that musty, stale smell of an empty home. Even the fridge, completely unplugged, had been wiped clean. Maybe the real estate company sent someone to clean before we moved in, my girlfriend reasoned. I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Then, little things started happening. The first night, I woke up feeling cold. I could have sworn I had closed the bedroom window before bed, but when I looked, it was wide open. The next morning, I found a coffee mug in the sink. Neither of us had used one. It was unsettling, but we brushed it off. Maybe we just weren't paying attention. Then, on the third night, I heard the footsteps. Soft, deliberate, moving through the hallway. I sat up in bed, my pulse pounding. The sound stopped just outside our bedroom door. I held my breath. Then, the door handle rattled. I shot out of bed, flinging the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. That's when I decided to set up cameras inside the house. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The following morning, I checked the footage, and what I saw made my blood run cold. At 3:12 a.m., the attic hatch, one I didn't even know existed, slowly slid open. A thin, pale hand reached down. Then, inch by inch, a figure emerged. Not from outside, not from a break-in, but from inside the walls. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. The figure moved slowly, unfolding itself from the attic hatch. The camera's night vision cast everything in an eerie green glow, but even through the grainy footage, I could see him thin, hunched, moving on bare feet. His skin looked pale and sickly, his limbs awkward and too long. He dropped to the floor without a sound. Then he turned, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. He knew about the cameras. He stared directly into one, his face still hidden by the shadows. Then, as if mocking me, he tilted his head. He had been watching us. My hands were shaking as I skipped through the footage. He had been coming down every night, walking through the house while we slept, watching us. My girlfriend walked in just as I slammed the laptop shut. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing my face. I hesitated. I didn't want to scare her. I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. So I lied. Nothing. Just checking the cameras. Everything's fine. But that night, I stayed awake. I kept my ears open, listening for anything. Every creak, every shift in the old wooden beams sent my pulse skyrocketing. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I heard it. A faint, deliberate slide. The attic hatch. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I gripped the baseball bat I had placed beside the bed and waited. Then footsteps. Soft, slow, moving down the hall. They stopped, right outside our bedroom door. The handle twitched. I sat up, heart hammering. The door didn't open. The handle just turned slightly, back and forth. Testing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. I waited until dawn before checking the camera footage again. This time, I saw his face. Gaunt, hollow eyes sunken into his skull. His mouth slightly open, revealing yellowed teeth. He had stood outside our door for over 20 minutes, just listening. We left the house that morning. We never went back. When I showed the footage to the police, they searched the house. The attic was empty, but in the walls, behind the old wooden panels, they found bedding, clothes, empty food wrappers, and a small, scratched message carved into the wood near a tiny peephole into our bedroom. I used to live here. I should have felt relief when the police cleared the house, but I didn't, because deep down, I knew. He was still out there. After the discovery in the walls, the cops suggested it had been a squatter, some homeless drifter who had moved in when the house was abandoned. But that explanation didn't sit right with me. Why had he never stolen anything? Why did he move through the house so carefully, deliberately? Why had he watched us instead of running the first time we arrived? And the biggest question of all, how long had he been there before we moved in? We left town that same afternoon, crashing at a cheap motel for the night. Neither of us spoke much. My girlfriend clutched her phone, jumping at every small noise outside. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A notification from the home security app. My breath caught. I stared at the screen. Motion detected. I swallowed hard and tapped the video feed. The camera flickered to life, showing the empty living room. The house was dark, just as we had left it. Then, movement. A shape emerging from the attic hatch. My stomach dropped. He was back. I turned the volume up slightly, straining to hear. A faint, rasping breath filled the speakers. The figure stood still for a moment, then turned, looking directly at the camera. And this time, I saw everything. His face was gaunt, but not from starvation. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes dark and hollow, like he hadn't seen daylight in years. His mouth hung slightly open, revealing rotting, uneven teeth. But what made my skin crawl wasn't how he looked. It was what he did next. He smiled. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached up, slowly, methodically, and turned the camera off. The screen went black. My whole body went cold. I felt sick. He knew we were watching. I jumped up, grabbing my girlfriend's arm. We need to go. She didn't argue. We packed up and left the motel within minutes, speeding away from town without looking back. We never sold the house. Never went back. Just disappeared, left it behind like it had never belonged to us. A few months later, I checked the property listing online. It was back on the market. Same low price. Same perfect description. But something was different. Under previous owners, our names weren't there. As if we had never lived there at all. And the listing title? It had changed. Quiet Lakeside Home. Previous owner recently moved out. I don't check the cameras anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder, is he still there? Waiting for the next owners? Story 3. By William. We weren't supposed to be there. The cabin wasn't part of our trip. It wasn't even on the map. My friends and I had planned a quiet weekend at a rented lake house, a chance to escape the city and unwind. But on the second afternoon, while exploring the dense forest around the property, we found it. A small, rotting cabin sat on the far side of the lake, hidden behind a thick wall of trees. The windows were boarded up, the wooden walls dark with age and water damage. It looked abandoned. Or so we thought. Dude, we have to check it out, Damien, my best friend, said, already stepping onto the creaky porch. I hesitated. Something about the place felt wrong. There was no path leading to it, no sign that anyone had lived there in years, except for the old, rusted fishing boat tied to a half-broken dock nearby. Someone had been here. Recently. But Damien didn't care. He pushed on the door. It was unlocked. The smell hit us first. Damp wood, stale air, and something else. Something rotten. Inside, the cabin was nearly empty. A dusty old bed, a broken chair, and a single wooden table covered in deep scratches. The only real sign of life was an open journal resting on the table. I picked it up. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, as if written by someone whose hands couldn't stay still. He comes from the lake at night. I see him watching from the trees. I thought I was alone, but I hear him breathing under the floorboards. My skin crawled. Let's go, I whispered. Damien scoffed, but I didn't care. I turned to leave, then froze. Through the cracked window, I saw something. The old boat we had passed earlier? It was no longer tied to the dock. It was drifting back onto the lake. And inside it, a figure sat motionless, facing our cabin, watching us. I grabbed Damien's arm. We need to leave. Now. He followed my gaze to the boat. The figure inside was completely still, facing the cabin, but I couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape hunched over in the small, rotting vessel. Damien's bravado vanished. Shit. Neither of us moved. The only sound was the faint lapping of water against the dock. Then, ever so slowly, the figure in the boat tilted its head, as if acknowledging us. That was enough. We bolted out of the cabin, crashing through the trees, barely able to breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pushed forward, branches whipping against my arms. I didn't dare look back. When we finally reached our rental house, we slammed the door shut and locked it. The others, Emma and Josh, looked at us in confusion. What the hell happened? Emma asked. There's someone out there, I panted. In a boat. Watching the cabin. Josh frowned. What cabin? We looked at each other. The one across the lake, Damien said. It's old, abandoned looking. But we found a journal. There's no cabin across the lake, Josh interrupted. We walked that side earlier. It's just trees. A chill ran through me. That's not possible, I said. I swear to God, Emma added, shaking her head. There's nothing there. Damien and I were still catching our breath when I glanced out the window. The lake was calm, stretching into the distance. And there, floating in the water, was the boat. Empty. Just drifting. No, I whispered. He was in it. We saw him. Damien turned to me, his face pale. Then where is he now? A slow, deliberate knock echoed from the back door. We all froze. 3 knocks. Then silence. Emma covered her mouth. Josh clenched his fists. We hadn't heard anyone approach. I took a step toward the door. The light above the porch flickered. And then, a single, wet footprint appeared beneath the doorframe. I couldn't breathe. The wet footprint beneath the doorframe sent a cold shiver down my spine. It was fresh, the water still glistening in the dim porch light. Someone, or something, was standing just outside. No one moved. The silence pressed against us, thick and suffocating. Then another knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the wood. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering in my ears. Damien took a shaky step back, his bravado completely gone. Emma gripped Josh's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Who is it? Josh finally whispered. No answer. Just a faint, almost imperceptible breathing. And then, the doorknob turned. I don't know what came over me, but I lunged forward and locked the deadbolt just in time. A second later, the handle jerked violently. Someone was trying to get in. Shut the lights off, I hissed. Emma rushed to flick the switches. The house plunged into darkness, leaving only the faint glow of the moon reflecting off the lake. Then, we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, wet footsteps circling the house. Heavy and deliberate, like whoever was out there wanted us to hear them. We backed away from the door, moving toward the center of the living room. I could barely see Damien's face in the dim light, but I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. This wasn't normal. The footsteps stopped at the front window. Then, in the faint moonlight, I saw it. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the glass. Hunched. Motionless. Watching us. Oh my God, Emma whimpered. The figure lifted a hand and pressed it against the glass. Water dripped from its fingers, smearing across the window in streaks. And then it spoke. A hoarse, ragged whisper, barely audible through the glass. You took my boat. My stomach turned to ice. Damien grabbed my arm. We're leaving. Now. No one argued. We moved quickly, grabbing only what we needed: keys, phones, shoes. We didn't look at the window again. Josh yanked the door open, and we bolted for the car. The forest around us felt alive, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them before shoving one into the ignition. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the house. The figure was gone. The boat, too. Just an empty dock. A still lake. As if nothing had ever been there. The tires spun against the gravel as we peeled away, speeding down the dirt road without looking back. We never returned to the lake house. We told the rental company we had an emergency and left our deposit behind. A few days later, curiosity got the best of me. I searched online for anything about that cabin, but I found nothing. No record of an old cabin by the lake. No mention of a missing man. Just one vague forum post from years ago, buried in a thread about abandoned places. If you ever visit the lake and see an old boat floating alone, leave it alone. If you take it, he'll come looking for it. He always does.